The second time I watched the video, I noticed my husband's wedding ring. Not his voice. Not the men sitting beside him. The ring. Silver. Scratched near the bottom. A tiny dent from the year he dropped it fixing our mailbox. I paused the video there. My daughter was asleep upstairs. And for the first time in 23 years of marriage, I felt afraid to look at my husband when he came home. 3 days earlier, none of this existed. At least that's what I believed. My daughter Ava came through the front door just after 6 on a Thursday evening. The school bus had already stopped running for the summer, so the church camp used private vans. I remember hearing the tires outside while I was unloading groceries. She usually walked in talking. About counselors, camp food, girls she liked, girls she didn't. That afternoon she walked in silently. She was holding a folded piece of paper so tightly her knuckles looked pale. "Ava." She looked up at me slowly. Her eyes were swollen. Not dramatic crying, not teenage frustration. Fear. Real fear. I put the grocery bag down immediately. "What happened?" She swallowed hard before handing me the note. Her hand was trembling. Actually, trembling. I still remember that detail because Ava was never an anxious child. Even when she was little, she had a strange calmness about her. During storms, she used to sit near the windows counting seconds between lightning and thunder. But that day she couldn't look at me directly. On the paper was one sentence. "Tell your mother to stop asking questions." That was it. No name. No explanation. I looked back up at her. "Who gave this to you?" "A guy." "What guy?" "I don't know." She rubbed her palms against her shorts. "He worked there, I think." "At the camp." She nodded once. "He said I had to give it to you myself." I felt my stomach tighten slightly. But only slightly. Because mothers do something dangerous sometimes. We explain things away to protect ourselves. I told myself it was probably some cruel prank, maybe connected to the school board meetings I'd attended that spring. Parents had been arguing over funding cuts and staffing changes for months. Small-town politics always became personal eventually. I folded the note carefully. "You're okay now," I told her. She nodded too quickly. That scared me more than the note. I made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner because it was the only thing she usually ate when she was upset. She barely touched hers. My husband Daniel came home around 7:15 wearing his blue work shirt and carrying dry cleaning over one arm. He kissed the top of my head automatically. "How was camp pickup?" Ava flinched. Tiny movement. Barely visible. But I saw it. Daniel saw it too. "What happened?" I answered before she could. Someone gave her a stupid note at camp. His expression changed very slightly. Not panic. Recognition. Then it disappeared. "What kind of note?" I handed it to him. He read it once. Then again. His jaw tightened almost invisibly before he handed it back. Kids are idiots. Maybe another woman would have missed it. The pause. The way he avoided looking directly at Ava afterward. The fact that he suddenly became overly cheerful through dinner. But marriage teaches you invisible languages. Especially long marriages. That night, Ava asked if she could sleep with the hallway light on. She hadn't done that since middle school. I stood in the doorway after she fell asleep. The light stretched across her bedroom carpet in a thin yellow line. She looked younger somehow. Smaller. I bent down to move her backpack off the floor before leaving. That's when I saw the flash drive. Black. Taped beneath one of the side straps. My pulse slowed immediately. Not faster. Slower. That strange cold slowing your body does before panic fully arrives. I stared at it for almost a minute before touching it. Daniel was downstairs watching television. Some financial news program he never actually listened to. I slipped the flash drive into my sweater pocket without saying anything. Then I walked downstairs carefully. Normal pace. Normal breathing. Marriage teaches performance too. Daniel glanced up from the couch. "You okay?" "Just tired." He muted the television. "You think Ava's all right?" There it was again. Too careful. Too measured. I think she got scared. He nodded slowly. "Kids today are fragile." I didn't answer. He looked away first. Later that night, after he fell asleep beside me, I took my laptop into the kitchen. The house sounded different after midnight. The refrigerator hummed louder. Floorboards settled. Every sound felt isolated. I plugged in the flash drive. There was only one file. No title. Just numbers. The footage opened shakily. Someone had recorded it secretly on a phone. A conference room. Cheap blinds. Coffee cups. Men in dress shirts sitting around a table. At first, I didn't recognize anyone. Then I noticed Councilman Pete Holloway near the back wall. After that, 2 others. A local developer. A church finance director. Men whose wives hosted charity luncheons. Men who shook hands too firmly at fundraisers. The camera moved suddenly. Someone whispered, "Keep recording." Then I heard Daniel. Not clearly at first. Just fragments. Can't afford exposure. Family people involved? Quiet resolution? My chest tightened. I moved closer to the screen. Daniel stepped partially into frame then. Blue tie. White shirt. Reading glasses hanging from his collar. The same outfit he'd worn to church 2 Sundays earlier. He sounded calm. Controlled. But underneath it was something else. Fear. The video ended abruptly after 43 seconds. No explanation. No context. Just Daniel's voice saying one final sentence. "We protect this now or it destroys all of us." Then black screen. I sat there staring at my reflection in the laptop long after it ended. The kitchen window above the sink showed darkness outside. My own face looked unfamiliar. Not devastated. Not shocked. Just still. Like some part of me had quietly arrived somewhere before the rest caught up. Upstairs, I heard Daniel coughing softly in his sleep. I replayed the video again. Then again. By the 3rd viewing, I noticed the wedding ring. Silver. Scratched underneath? The tiny dent near the bottom. The one from our mailbox. That was the moment denial disappeared. Not because of what he said. Because suddenly the man in the video wasn't just a voice anymore. He was my husband. And somehow that felt worse. I spent the next morning pretending nothing had changed. That was the first thing marriage had taught me well. How to continue routines while something quietly collapsed underneath them. Daniel left for work at 7:30. Same travel mug. Ça m'évitiait. Same kiss against my forehead near the coffee maker. But this time he held eye contact half a second too long. As if he was checking whether I knew something. Or whether Ava had said something. After he left, I stood at the kitchen sink staring into the backyard. Our subdivision looked painfully ordinary in the mornings. Sprinklers ticking across trimmed lawns. A golden retriever dragging its owner down the sidewalk. Delivery trucks moving slowly between driveways. The kind of neighborhood where people discussed retirement accounts during block parties and quietly judged each other's landscaping. I used to find comfort in that predictability. That morning it felt staged. Ava came downstairs wearing one of my old college sweatshirts. Too big for her. She looked exhausted. I slid a plate of toast toward her. "Did you sleep?" "A little." She picked at the crust without eating. I kept my voice calm. "You said someone gave you the note." She nodded. "What did he look like?" "I don't know." "You saw him?" She hesitated. "Older." "How old?" She shrugged weakly. "Dad age, maybe." Something cold moved through me then. Not panic. Recognition. Because teenage girls exaggerate boys into men all the time. But they rarely mistake middle-aged men for teenagers. "Did he say your name?" "No." "Did he touch you?" Her head snapped upward immediately. "No." Too fast again. I softened my voice. "You can tell me the truth." "I am telling the truth." Then she whispered, "He knew yours." I didn't answer immediately. She stared down at the table again. "He said everybody gets hurt when people ask the wrong questions." I felt my stomach tighten harder this time. Not because of the threat, because of the wording. Adults speak like that. Adults who spend years justifying things to themselves. I reached across the table and touched her wrist gently. "You did the right thing bringing it home." She looked unconvinced. When she left the room, I opened the video again. This time I watched details instead of people. The conference room. The angle. The coffee cups. A legal pad near the edge of the table. One phrase partially visible in blue ink. River Glen Youth Initiative. I stared at the words. River Glen was the church camp. I replayed that frame 3 more times. Then I closed the laptop immediately when I heard footsteps upstairs. For the rest of the afternoon, I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. Bathroom counters, kitchen drawers, the pantry. Fear sometimes disguises itself as productivity. Around 4, my neighbor Denise stopped by carrying lemon bars on a paper plate. Denise had lived across from us for 11 years. Same blonde highlights, same Pilates classes, same habit of lowering her voice before saying anything remotely interesting. She leaned against the kitchen island while I made coffee. How's Ava after camp? Tired. Denise nodded slowly. I heard there was some kind of issue. I looked up carefully. What kind of issue? She hesitated just enough to matter. You know how people talk. No, I don't. Another pause. Then she smiled too quickly. I'm sure it's nothing. There it was again. That subtle shifting. The feeling that conversations were happening around me instead of with me. Before leaving, Denise touched my arm lightly. Daniel's been under a lot of pressure lately. I kept my expression neutral. What kind of pressure? Oh, just work things. She left before I could ask anything else. That evening, Daniel grilled salmon outside while Ava sat quietly at the patio table, scrolling through her phone without reading anything. The sky looked heavy with rain. Daniel kept trying to create normal conversation. So Pete Holloway's wife wants another fundraiser next month. I froze slightly at the name. Only slightly. Ava looked between us. I picked up my wine glass slowly. That sounds exhausting. He laughed. It pays for the youth center. The youth center. River Glen. I watched him carefully. How involved are you with them now? Not much anymore. Too fast. Then he added casually, Why? I shrugged. Just asking. His eyes stayed on me a second too long again. Later that night, Ava disappeared upstairs early. Daniel remained downstairs watching baseball. Muted. He wasn't watching the game either. Finally, he spoke without looking at me. You've been quiet. So have you. He smiled faintly. That's not unusual after 20 years. 23. He forgot the number. I noticed because I had started noticing everything. Small slips suddenly felt enormous. I folded a blanket slowly across my lap. Did something happen at River Glen? His face remained calm. What do you mean? There was a note. A stupid prank. There was also a flash drive. That got him. Not dramatically. No shouting. No panic. Just stillness. His hand stopped against the remote control. Only for a second. Then he looked at me carefully. What flash drive? I realized immediately he already knew. People who are innocent ask confused questions. People hiding things ask controlled ones. I kept my breathing even. The one taped under Ava's backpack. He leaned back slowly. What was on it? Again. Not surprise. Measurement. I studied him quietly. The man I married had always been emotionally disciplined. That quality once made me feel safe. Now it felt impossible to read. I saw a meeting. His jaw tightened slightly. What kind of meeting? You tell me. Long silence. The muted baseball game flickered blue light across the room. Finally he stood. I'm going to shower. That was all. No denial. No explanation. Just retreat. I sat alone in the living room afterward, listening to water running upstairs. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered quietly. Hello? A woman's voice spoke softly. You need to stop asking questions about River Glen. I stood immediately. Who is this? Your husband made choices years ago. My pulse pounded now. What choices? Silence. Then, you should ask him what happened to the girl. The call disconnected. I stared at the phone in my hand. The girl. Not a lawsuit. Not money. A girl. Upstairs, the shower water stopped running. I heard Daniel moving around our bedroom. Opening drawers. Closing them. The familiar sounds of ordinary marriage. But suddenly every sound felt borrowed from another life. I looked toward the staircase. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized I was afraid of what my husband might say if I asked the wrong question directly. The next morning, Daniel made pancakes. That was how I knew he was scared. Not because he was affectionate. Daniel had always been affectionate in practical ways. He filled my gas tank, replaced dead batteries before I noticed them, warmed my car during winter mornings. But pancakes were performance, especially on weekdays. Ava noticed it too. She sat at the kitchen table watching him too carefully while he flipped batter in the skillet. "You're burning them," she said quietly. Daniel smiled without turning around. "Still edible." Nobody laughed. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The local news played low in the background. Some story about rising property taxes. Normal life continued everywhere except inside our house. Daniel finally placed a plate in front of Ava. "You doing okay, kiddo?" She nodded too quickly again. He sat beside her. "You know people say stupid things sometimes." Ava stared down at the pancakes. "Okay. That note doesn't mean anything." "Okay." The second okay sounded different. Flatter. Disconnected. Daniel looked toward me for help. I pretended to refill my coffee. That afternoon, after Daniel left for work, I called the number back from the unknown caller. Disconnected. I tried twice more. Nothing. Then I opened the River Glen website. Church camps all looked strangely identical online. Smiling children, kayaks, Bible verses in soft blue lettering, pictures of counselors hugging teenagers near campfires. Safety presented professionally. At the bottom of the staff page, I noticed a familiar name. Pete Holloway. Board treasurer. My stomach tightened again. I clicked further. Another name appeared. Daniel Mercer. Community Outreach Advisory Committee. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Daniel told me 2 years ago he had stepped away from River Glen entirely. A small lie. But small lies usually protect larger ones. That afternoon I drove to lunch with my friend Karen Whitmore. Karen and I met 12 years earlier through a women's Bible study group that eventually dissolved into wine nights and quiet marital confessions. She worked in medical billing for St. Anne's Hospital and somehow knew everybody's business without ever sounding cruel about it. We sat inside a small cafe near the courthouse. Rain streaked the windows outside. Karen watched me stir soup I wasn't eating. "You look exhausted." "I probably am." "Is it Ava?" "Partly." But I didn't answer immediately. Karen lowered her voice. "What's going on?" I looked around first. Not because I thought someone was listening. Because lately I no longer trusted silence. Finally I spoke carefully. "Do you know anything about River Glen?" Karen's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. That tiny pause again. "The kind people think nobody notices." "What kind of things?" "That's not an answer." She looked uncomfortable immediately. "I only know gossip." "What gossip?" Karen hesitated. Then? "There was supposedly some issue years ago with one of the counselors." "What issue?" "I don't know exactly." "Karen." She sighed quietly. "People said a girl filed complaints." I felt heat move through my chest. "What kind of complaints?" "She said certain men protected someone." "Protected who?" "I don't know." But she did know more. I could see it. Karen avoided eye contact while folding her napkin into tiny squares. "What happened to her?" She moved away. "That's it." Karen finally looked at me directly. "You need to understand something." "What?" "These people all know each other." The way she said people told me exactly who she meant. Church donors. Business owners. School board members. The same couple sitting beside us every Sunday pretending stability equaled morality. Karen reached for my hand gently. "Daniel's respected around here." I almost laughed at that. Respected. Such a fragile word. Built mostly from repetition. "He lied to me," I whispered. Karen looked genuinely sad then. "About what?" I stared through the rain outside. "I don't even know yet." When I got home, Ava was sitting on the floor in the laundry room folding towels slowly. Usually she rushed through chores while texting friends. Now she moved carefully, quietly, like she was listening for something. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally she asked, Are you mad at Dad? Children always sense emotional weather before adults admit it exists. I don't know. She folded another towel. He keeps checking my phone. I looked at her sharply. What? He asked who I told about the note. When? Last night. A cold heaviness settled inside me. What exactly did he say? He said some people make up stories when they're angry. I stared at the washing machine turning slowly beside us. He shouldn't have asked you that. Ava's voice dropped softer. He seemed scared. That hurt unexpectedly. Not because she noticed. Because I had noticed it too. That evening Daniel came home carrying grocery store flowers. Yellow tulips. My favorite. Except tulips weren't in season anymore. He must have driven somewhere special to find them. Again. Performance. He kissed my cheek while setting them near the sink. Long day. I nodded. You? Meetings. Always meetings. I watched him loosen his tie. Tired eyes. Gray appearing near his temples lately. A middle-aged man trying to hold together a version of himself. For one brief moment I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered Ava shaking in our doorway. At dinner, Daniel barely ate. Ava barely spoke. Every sound felt amplified. Forks touching plates, ice settling in glasses. The silence between ordinary questions. Finally, Daniel looked at Ava carefully. You know I'd never let anything happen to you, right? She nodded slowly. But she didn't look convinced. Neither was I. Later that night after Ava went upstairs, Daniel found me sitting on the back patio alone. The rain had stopped. Everything smelled wet and cold. He sat beside me quietly. We should talk. I stared into the yard. Then talk. Long pause. I made mistakes. Not denial. Not confession. Positioning. What mistakes? He rubbed his palms together slowly. There were situations at River Glen that became complicated. Complicated for who? He looked away. You don't understand how quickly lives can get destroyed over accusations. Accusations. Not harm. Not victims. Accusations. I heard it immediately. So did he. Because he stopped speaking afterward. I turned toward him fully for the first time. Did somebody get hurt? His jaw tightened. It wasn't that simple. I felt something inside me harden quietly. The most dangerous people rarely sound dangerous. They sound reasonable. Measured. Concerned. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I was trying to protect our family. There it is. He frowned. What? You keep saying family when you mean reputation. He looked genuinely wounded then. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because nobody had ever said it aloud before. Finally he whispered, You think you know people? I stood slowly. No. I looked down at him carefully. I think that's the problem. Before going inside, I noticed something through the kitchen window. Daniel's phone lighting up repeatedly on the counter. One message after another. Same contact name. Pete Holloway. I found the second file by accident. Not through intelligence. Not through courage. Through exhaustion. 3 nights after seeing the first video, I sat alone in Daniel's home office while rain pressed softly against the windows. He had fallen asleep downstairs in front of the television again. We had started avoiding bed at the same time. Marriage can end quietly long before anyone leaves. I reopened the flash drive mostly because I could no longer tolerate uncertainty. The first video file still sat there. 43 seconds. I watched it again. Councilman Holloway near the blinds. The church finance director rubbing his forehead nervously. Daniel speaking calmly about protecting families. I paused at the final frame. Then I noticed something I had missed before. A corrupted folder hidden behind the original file. Tiny. Almost invisible. My pulse slowed immediately. I clicked it twice before it opened. One additional video appeared. Longer this time. Nearly 6 minutes. I stared at the screen for several seconds before pressing play. The footage began shakily again. Same conference room. Same men. But now the camera angle was clearer. Whoever recorded it had hidden the phone inside a jacket pocket. Voices overlapped at first. Tense. Defensive. Then a young woman spoke. You knew what he was doing." Nobody answered immediately. I leaned closer to the screen. The woman sounded young. Early 20s, maybe. Nervous, but trying not to sound nervous. Daniel finally spoke. "We're trying to resolve this responsibly." The girl laughed once. Short, bitter. "You're trying to bury it." Silence filled the room afterward. Not angry silence. Fearful silence. The kind powerful people create together. One of the men cleared his throat. "You need to think carefully before making claims that damage innocent families." Families again. Always families. The girl spoke more quietly this time. "He followed girls into cabins." My chest tightened instantly. He touched me. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody denied it. One of the men asked softly, "Was there alcohol involved?" I actually stopped breathing for a second. Not because of the question itself, because of how practiced it sounded. Like they had already rehearsed the language. The girl answered, "I was 17. Another long silence followed. Then Daniel spoke again. Calm. Measured. The same voice he used discussing mortgage rates or retirement planning. "We understand emotions are high." Emotions. Not assault. Not trauma. Emotions. The girl's voice cracked then. "You're protecting him because his father donates money." Nobody answered her directly. Instead, Daniel leaned forward slightly into frame. I saw the wedding ring again. That tiny dent near the bottom. "We need a solution that avoids destroying multiple lives." That sentence changed something permanently inside me. Because suddenly I understood the real horror. It wasn't rage. It wasn't cruelty. It was prioritization. These men had decided which lives mattered most before the meeting even began. The girl started crying quietly near the end of the recording. Not dramatic sobbing. The exhausted crying of someone realizing nobody intended to help her. Then the camera shifted suddenly. Someone whispered, "She's recording this." The video cut immediately afterward. I sat frozen in Daniel's office. The rain outside sounded louder now. My own breathing sounded unfamiliar. For several minutes I couldn't move at all. Not because I was shocked. Because deep down some part of me had suspected this already. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. The emotional architecture. Daniel's obsession with appearances. His fear of public embarrassment. The way he spoke about protecting stability whenever uncomfortable truths surfaced around anyone. I suddenly remembered a conversation from 8 years earlier. A church couple had divorced after the husband's affair became public. Daniel shook his head afterward and said, "Some people should handle private mistakes privately." At the time I agreed with him. That memory made me physically nauseous now. Because I realized something unbearable. People do not wake up one morning capable of protecting predators. They practice smaller compromises first. Tiny moral rearrangements, one uncomfortable silence at a time. A floorboard creaked outside the office. I closed the laptop immediately. Daniel stood in the hallway, barefoot, half asleep. "You coming to bed?" For one terrifying second I thought he knew, but his face looked tired. Not suspicious. I forced my voice steady. "In a minute." He nodded slowly, then paused. "You okay?" I looked directly at him. Really looked at him. 23 years together. Family vacations. Mortgage payments. Funeral arrangements for both his parents. Thousands of ordinary mornings. And somehow I no longer recognized the man standing in front of me. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Something flickered across his face then. Not anger. Recognition. As if he finally understood the distance between us had become visible. He looked away first. Again. The next morning, Ava refused breakfast completely. She sat at the kitchen island wearing headphones without music playing. I could tell because no sound leaked through. She was using them as armor. Daniel kept glancing toward her while pretending to read emails on his phone. Finally, he said carefully, "You don't have to be scared anymore." Ava stared at the counter. "How do you know?" He froze slightly. "Because your mom and I are handling it." Handling it? I watched Ava's expression change subtly. Not relief. Disappointment. Children know when adults are lying far earlier than adults realize. After Daniel left for work, Ava remained silent for almost 10 minutes. Then she asked quietly, "Did Dad do something bad?" The question entered the room gently, like something already half known. I sat beside her slowly. "What makes you ask that?" "He keeps acting weird." I didn't answer. Ava rubbed her thumb against the edge of her phone case. "At camp, the guy who gave me the note." She stopped talking. I waited. "He said dads like mine always protect each other." My throat tightened painfully. What exactly did he mean? I don't know. But she did know enough. Enough to feel unsafe. Enough to stop trusting instinctively. Enough to begin losing part of childhood. That was the moment rage finally arrived. Not loud rage. Not revenge. Something colder. Because whatever Daniel had protected years ago was now touching our daughter emotionally, corrupting the safety of her world. That evening I confronted him. Not dramatically. No screaming. No throwing things. Middle-aged marriages rarely explode like movies. They erode. Daniel stood in the kitchen loosening his cufflinks while I placed the laptop on the counter between us. I found the second file. Everything inside him stopped. He didn't ask what file. Didn't pretend confusion. He simply closed his eyes briefly. Then sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Older somehow. Smaller. "I was afraid of that," he whispered. I stared at him. "There was a 17-year-old girl." He rubbed both hands across his face. "It wasn't how it looked." There it was. The sentence almost every guilty person believes sounds reasonable. I felt suddenly exhausted beyond anger. "You protected him." Daniel looked up sharply. "I protected us." I shook my head slowly. "No." My voice barely sounded like mine anymore. "You protected yourselves from consequences." He opened his mouth. Then stopped. Because for the first time there was nothing strategic left to say. The first thing people protect is their routine. Not their morality. Not their marriage. Their routine. The familiar shape of dinner at 6:30, shared streaming passwords, retirement projections, vacation plans discussed 6 months ahead. After the confrontation in the kitchen, Daniel slept in the downstairs guest room without either of us formally deciding it. That became our arrangement immediately. No conversation. No negotiation. Just quiet relocation. Ava noticed by the second morning. She walked into the kitchen wearing socks and one of my old sweatshirts again. Her eyes moved once toward the hallway leading to the guest room, then toward me, then away. She poured cereal without asking questions. Children adapt to emotional climate faster than adults do. That frightened me most. Daniel tried harder after that. Not louder. Harder. He started coming home earlier, cooking dinner twice in 1 week, offering to drive Ava to therapy appointments before we had even officially arranged therapy. Everything felt carefully considered. Like he was studying us from outside the family instead of living inside it. One evening he folded laundry while I stood at the sink rinsing dishes. He held one of Ava's camp t-shirts too long. Finally he asked quietly, "Does she hate me?" I dried my hands slowly before answering. "She doesn't trust you." He nodded once, as if that distinction mattered deeply to him. Maybe it did. The town itself shifted around us gradually. Not publicly. Nobody posted accusations online. Nobody confronted me directly after church services. But invitations changed. A couple's dinner we usually attended every month suddenly became postponed. Women who once stopped to talk after Sunday service now smiled from farther away. A few husbands avoided eye contact entirely. Reputation moves socially before facts do. Karen called me often during those weeks, mostly to check whether I had eaten. That became strangely difficult. Stress at 48 feels different than stress at 25. Your body doesn't panic dramatically anymore. It simply grows tired. One afternoon, Karen came over with grocery store soup and a bottle of white wine. We sat on the patio while Ava stayed upstairs. The late summer heat pressed heavily against the neighborhood. Lawnmowers buzzed in the distance. Karen watched me carefully over her wine glass. "You look thinner." "I'm fine." "No, you're functioning." I laughed quietly at that, because it was true. Functioning had replaced living lately. Karen eventually lowered her voice. "People are talking." About Daniel. She nodded. What are they saying? That he's resigning from the River Glen board. I looked up sharply. He didn't tell me. Karen hesitated. There's more. I waited. Apparently another woman came forward. A strange numbness moved through me then. Not shock. Confirmation. Karen reached across the table gently. You didn't know. It wasn't a question. Number. But even saying the word made me feel dishonest. Because somewhere deep down, maybe I had known the possibility of this version of Daniel existed. Maybe every wife notices small moral fractures long before collapse. We simply rename them things we can survive emotionally. Stress. Pressure. Pride. Ambition. That night, Daniel came home carrying takeout containers from my favorite Italian restaurant. Again. Performance. But weaker now. More desperate. Ava barely touched her food before going upstairs. Daniel watched her leave quietly. She won't even look at me. I stared at my plate. What did you expect? His face tightened immediately. I'm trying. I looked at him then. Really looked. Wrinkled blue shirt from a long workday, dark circles beneath his eyes, gray hair spreading near his temples. A tired suburban man sitting at his own dining table. Not a monster. That complicated things. Because evil would have been easier. Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly. You think I wanted any of this? Number. I answered honestly. I think you wanted control. He looked wounded by that, which told me it was true. The next morning I found Ava sitting alone in the garage before school. Just sitting there beside old paint cans and Christmas decorations. Her backpack rested near her feet untouched. What are you doing? She shrugged. It's quiet in here. I sat beside her carefully. Dust floated through thin sunlight near the garage door. After a long silence, she whispered, Did Dad know those girls? I chose my next words very carefully. I think he knew something bad was happening. Ava stared at the concrete floor. And he didn't stop it. There was no question mark at the end. Just realization. I swallowed hard. No. She nodded slowly, like someone assembling adulthood piece by piece against her will. Then she asked something that stayed with me forever. Do people become bad slowly? I looked at my daughter sitting beside storage boxes and bicycles. 14 years old. Still young enough to ask moral questions honestly. Yes, I answered quietly. I think they do. That afternoon, Daniel called unexpectedly while I was grocery shopping. I resigned. I stopped beside the frozen food section. What? River Glen. His voice sounded hollow. I resigned this morning. Around me, ordinary life continued. A mother arguing with her toddler over cereal brands. An employee stocking yogurt. Someone laughing near the pharmacy counter. Meanwhile, my marriage was ending between freezer aisles. Why now, I asked. Long silence. Then, because they wanted another meeting. I leaned against the shopping cart slowly. What kind of meeting? The kind where people convince themselves survival matters more than truth. I closed my eyes briefly. You already attended one of those. He inhaled sharply. I know. That was the first fully honest thing he had said in weeks. That evening he left a handwritten letter outside the bedroom door. Not dramatic. No declarations? Just folded notebook paper. I sat on the bed reading it twice. Claire. I keep trying to explain myself in ways that make me sound reasonable. Maybe because reasonable men still get invited to dinner. Maybe because I spent years believing stability mattered more than honesty. I thought protecting our life justified protecting people connected to it. I see now what that cost. Especially for Ava. I don't think I ever taught our daughter what integrity looks like. Daniel. I stared at the final sentence longest. Because it was the first sentence that sounded entirely true. No excuses. No positioning. Just grief. Downstairs I heard the television playing softly in the guest room. A familiar sound from a marriage that no longer felt familiar. And for the first time since all this began, I cried. Not for the man Daniel was. For the man he kept choosing not to become. Ava started locking her bedroom door after that. Not every night. Just sometimes. Quietly. Without making a point of it. That hurt more than any argument Daniel and I had ever shared. Because children do not lock doors against strangers first. They lock them against uncertainty. 3 weeks after Daniel moved into the guest room permanently, I found Ava sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, sorting old family photographs into piles. Keep. Throw away. Unsure. Sunlight stretched across the carpet in long afternoon lines. She picked up one picture from Disney World when she was 9. Daniel had her on his shoulders, both of them smiling with complete trust. She stared at it a long time, then placed it carefully into the unsure pile. I sat beside her quietly. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she asked, "Are you getting divorced?" The question sounded calm. Too calm. I folded my hands together slowly. "I don't know yet." Ava nodded once, almost like she expected that answer. I used to think Dad was the safest person I knew. There it was. The real damage. Not scandal. Not gossip. Not reputation. The collapse of emotional certainty. I looked at the photograph in her hands. People can love you and still fail you. She looked down again. That sounds terrible. It is. I didn't soften it. Some truths become cruel when polished too gently. That evening Daniel came home carrying grocery bags and paused slightly when he saw the photographs spread across the floor. His eyes landed on the Disney picture immediately, then on Ava. Something inside him visibly weakened. He set the groceries down slowly. "You guys doing all right?" Ava shrugged without looking up. Daniel stood there awkwardly for several seconds. A father suddenly uncertain how to enter his own living room. Finally he spoke softly. "I made spaghetti." Ava nodded again, still not looking at him. After dinner she disappeared upstairs early. Daniel washed dishes silently beside me. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and dish soap. Ordinary smells. Ordinary marriage sounds. Water running. Cabinet doors opening. A life still functioning externally while emotionally unraveling underneath. Finally, Daniel dried his hands. "She barely talks to me now." I kept my eyes on the sink. "She's trying to understand who you are." His face tightened immediately. "I'm still her father." "Yes." I turned toward him then. "But now she knows that doesn't automatically mean something." He looked away. The next week, Ava started therapy. A small office near St. Anne's Hospital with beige walls and soft instrumental music playing too quietly. I sat in the parking lot during her first session, gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. When she finally returned to the car, her eyes looked swollen but calmer somehow. We drove several minutes in silence. Then she asked suddenly, "Did you ever know something was wrong with Dad?" The question entered the car gently, like something she had rehearsed privately. I answered honestly, "Not like this. But something." I stared at the road ahead. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "What kind of something?" I thought carefully before speaking. "Your father always cared deeply about appearances." That doesn't sound bad. It isn't, until appearances matter more than people. Ava leaned her head against the window. Rain blurred the traffic lights outside. I think everybody at camp already knew. I looked over sharply. "What do you mean?" "The girls." She rubbed her sleeves nervously. "They acted weird whenever certain men visited." A cold heaviness settled into my chest. "How weird?" "Like, careful." "Careful. Teenage girls learn that feeling far too young." "When did you notice this?" "Last summer, maybe." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You never told me." I didn't know how. Neither of us spoke after that. Because suddenly I understood something unbearable. Ava had been learning female caution while I remained busy protecting normalcy. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I found Daniel sitting alone on the back patio wearing sweatpants and staring into darkness. The porch light remained off. Only moonlight touched the yard. He looked older outside at night. Less composed somehow. I sat in the chair across from him quietly. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then Daniel asked, "Did Ava talk today?" "Yes." He nodded faintly. "What did she say?" I studied him carefully before answering. "She said the girls at camp already knew which men to avoid." Daniel closed his eyes. His entire body seemed to fold inward slightly. That bad? Yes. The honesty landed visibly. He rubbed both hands across his face slowly. I told myself it wasn't my place. I felt anger rise immediately. But it was your place to protect the board. He looked exhausted. You think I don't hate myself for this? I answered quietly. No, I think you hate consequences. That struck him hard. Because deep down he knew there was truth inside it. Daniel leaned back heavily in the chair. You know what scares me most? I waited. That part of me still keeps trying to justify it. The vulnerability in his voice startled me. Not because it excused him. Because it sounded genuinely human. Flawed people rarely view themselves as villains. They build moral escape routes slowly. One compromise at a time. One rationalization at a time. Daniel stared into the dark yard. My father used to say reputation feeds families. I looked at him carefully. And integrity. He laughed once. Tired. Apparently not enough. For the first time in weeks, neither of us argued afterward. We simply sat there listening to distant traffic and tree branches moving softly in the wind. Two middle-aged people grieving different versions of the same marriage. The next afternoon, Ava asked if we could drive somewhere. Anywhere quiet. So I took her north toward Lake Harmon. About 90 minutes outside town. Small roads, antique stores, gas stations selling homemade pie near the register. The kind of places where nobody knows your name long enough to judge it. Halfway there, Ava fell asleep against the passenger window. I glanced over at her while driving. Still young enough to sleep during car rides. Still young enough to heal. I prayed silently that life had not hardened her too early. When we finally reached the lake, she stood near the water for a long time without speaking. Then quietly said, I don't want to grow up scared of everybody. I walked beside her slowly. You don't have to. She looked at me carefully. How? I thought about Daniel. About River Glen. About all the polite people who protected silence because discomfort threatened stability. Then I answered. By learning the difference between charm and character. By October, people stopped asking questions. That's how these things usually end in towns like ours. Not with justice. With fatigue. Another scandal replaced the previous one. School board elections took over local conversations. Church women moved on to discussing holiday charity drives and rising grocery prices. Public memory shortened. Private memory did not. Daniel rented a small townhouse 15 minutes away near the golf course. Close enough for Ava to visit. Far enough to make silence easier. He came by every Wednesday evening for dinner at first. Then every other Wednesday. Not because he stopped trying. Because rebuilding trust moved slower than scheduling it. The first few dinners felt painfully formal. Daniel asking Ava about school. Ava answering politely. Me refilling water glasses to avoid watching either of them too closely. We had become people performing the outline of a family while searching for its emotional center again. One Wednesday, Ava surprised both of us. Daniel was helping clear plates after dinner when she asked suddenly, Did Grandpa know? Daniel froze beside the sink. His father had been dead 4 years. What? About River Glen. The room became completely still. Daniel set the plate down carefully before answering. I don't know. Ava looked directly at him. You probably do. He swallowed hard. Yes. Not loud. Not defensive. Just honest. For once. Ava stared at the table afterward. Then quietly asked, Why didn't anybody stop it? Daniel sat down slowly across from her. Because there was no escaping the question anymore. I think he said carefully, people get used to protecting what benefits them. Ava looked up. Even if people get hurt. Daniel nodded once. Yes. The honesty in his face almost made him look younger somehow. Not redeemed. Just stripped down to something real. After he left that night, Ava stood at the kitchen window watching his taillights disappear down the street. I still love him, she whispered. I walked beside her slowly. I know. But I don't trust him the same way. I placed an arm gently around her shoulders. I know that too. She leaned against me quietly. And for the first time in months, it didn't feel like she was bracing herself emotionally. Just resting. A few weeks later, Daniel called unexpectedly while I was at work. I had returned part-time to the insurance office downtown after nearly 7 years at home, mostly because I needed structure again, something that belonged entirely to me. When my phone buzzed during lunch break, I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered softly, "Hi." Daniel sounded nervous. "I need to ask you something." "What?" "I've been contacted by investigators." I closed my office door slowly. "About River Glen." "Yes." Long pause. "What are you going to do?" Another silence. Then, "Tell the truth." I sat down carefully at my desk. Part of me wanted to feel victorious hearing that. But revenge rarely feels clean at middle age. Mostly it feels sad. "Why now?" I asked quietly. Daniel exhaled heavily. "Because Ava looks at me differently." That answer stayed with me. Not because it excused him. Because it finally sounded honest without strategy attached. A few days later, Karen came over carrying pumpkin bread and gossip as usual. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, shaking her head slowly. "People are saying Daniel cooperated." "He did." Karen studied me carefully. "You still care about him?" "Not a question." I looked down at my coffee mug. "Yes." "Does that make you angry?" I thought about it honestly. "No." "What does—" I stared toward the hallway where Ava's laughter drifted faintly from her bedroom while talking to a friend on speakerphone. "That he confused protecting us with controlling the story." Karen nodded slowly. "That's a very male way to ruin a family." I laughed unexpectedly at that. Real laughter. The first in months. Winter arrived early that year. One Saturday afternoon, Ava and I decorated the Christmas tree while old jazz records played softly through the house. For the first time since summer, the house felt warm again instead of tense. Not healed, but alive. Ava handed me a faded ornament shaped like a tiny canoe from River Glen camp years earlier. We both stared at it. Then she asked, "Do you want to throw this away?" I took the ornament carefully. The paint had chipped slightly near the edges. A memory damaged but still existing. "No," I answered finally. "Why not?" I hung it gently on a higher branch. "Because one bad truth doesn't erase every good memory." Ava considered that quietly, then nodded. That night, Daniel stopped by to drop off a birthday gift for Ava's friend. Before leaving, he lingered awkwardly near the doorway. Snow drifted lightly outside. He looked tired, but calmer than before. "I've been meaning to thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not turning me into someone unrecognizable to Ava." I studied him carefully. "You did enough of that yourself." He accepted the sentence without flinching. Then he smiled faintly. "You always did know how to land a sentence." I almost smiled back. Almost. Before leaving, he paused again. I was terrified of losing status. I crossed my arms quietly. And Daniel looked out toward the snow-covered street. I should have been more terrified of losing myself. After he left, I stood at the front window watching snow collect across the neighborhood. The same neighborhood that once felt so permanent, so morally certain. Now I understood something different. Most people aren't divided into good and evil. They're divided into what they are willing to ignore in order to keep living comfortably. And eventually those choices become identity. Later that night, I walked past Ava's bedroom. The door was slightly open. She was asleep beneath soft yellow light from the hallway. For months, she had needed that light to feel safe. Tonight, the hallway was dark. She had forgotten to turn it on. I stood there quietly for a long moment before returning to my own room. Then I opened the bedside drawer. Inside was the original note, folded carefully, worn soft at the edges from rereading. I looked at it one last time, then dropped it into the trash. If this story meant something, maybe it was this. The people we love will disappoint us eventually. Sometimes quietly, sometimes terribly. But dignity returns the moment we stop protecting lies more fiercely than truth. And if you've ever had to rebuild trust inside your own family, I hope you remember this. Silence can preserve appearances, but honesty is what finally lets people sleep peacefully again.